Hi, everybody. I'm really impressed that we have this many people this late in the day. I thought the food coma from lunch maybe has been helped out by the coffee. But first off, we just wanted to start out with a thank you. See, everybody does it at the end. I'm going to do it right up front. But actually, though I am happy that you're all here, I'm actually looking to thank all the folks that aren't here, right? Friends, family, coworkers, right? All the people that make it possible for us to escape to Minneapolis for better part of a week and get to hang out and be nerds. So just a quick one, huh? Little audience participation, right? Right on. Cool. So I am happy that you're here, though. It gives us an opportunity to talk about what I'm really excited about, which is timeshares and you, the joys of fractional ownership. Okay, maybe not timeshares, right? What we're really here to talk about is securing Macs in any environment. Enterprise, education, small, medium business, you name it, right? And if you get a peek at the screen there, there's a bunch of terms that you've probably heard in your careers. Maybe you've heard them for the first time here this week. So a pinch of backstory, and while I give you the backstory, just the resources for this part of the conference here, we do have the whole session basically to ourselves for Q&A. So, internet connection permitting here, we'll try and check them as we go, but absolutely we want to make sure that everybody gets asked the questions that they're most interested in. If that doesn't get to happen, be sure to use those discussion forums as a way to keep the conversation going. So, with that said, a pinch of background. I started at a financial services firm a handful of years ago, and after maybe the first week of, wow, I can't believe they hired me, there was a pinch of, oh my gosh, I don't know about half of the things they're talking to me about. And so the panic starts to kick in, and I notice, hey, there seems to be this conference going on in Minneapolis. Never been to Minneapolis, might as well go to that one. And so in 2011, I found myself here at the JNUC for the first time. And man, did I get a schooling, right? There was an awful lot of questions coming out of me to some of the folks on this stage who thankfully put up with me at the time. And so what we really wanted to do was try and put together something that tried to formalize what was at the time a super positive experience for me personally, and I think for a lot of you all as well. So what that means for all of us today is we're going to be doing all Q&A for the whole session, right? That's it. And so ideally, we're going to get some interaction from you all and take advantage of a fantastic group of panelists that we've got up here. If you guys just want to raise your hands as I call them out. Rich Troughton from Howard Hughes Medical Institute, they're MacSys admin there. We've got Jason Bush, MacSys admin out of Seattle, Mike Dodge and AJ Chand out of Facebook, and also Jonathan Spiva from 74-Bit Inc., also a Seattle guy. Woo, go Seattle. So without a heck of a lot more, I'm going to go ahead and put those things up there. The QR code does link to that forum post so that, on Jamf Nation, so you can go ahead and contribute to the conversation there. And I'm just going to leave that up for the rest of the time. So we do have a whole bunch of topics that we've all been talking about throughout the course of the week. But I'd also like to mention for those of you coming in from the File Vault 2 session, Rich packed an awful lot into that session, so we'd love to have any of the questions that made it over, any of you folks that made it over from there, give you an opportunity to ask those questions now. So I'm kind of done with all the official stuff. I'd love to go ahead and open it up. Yeah, Jeremy. So if I can just repeat it, is for about File Vault 2, is the EFI password exclusive to File Vault 2?
Okay, so you're asking about the EFI firmware password? Yeah, those are separate. You can have both the EFI firmware password and File Vault 2 together. They coexist just fine. But yeah, they are separate passwords because the EFI password is tied to a specific password where File Vault 2 is designed to be tied to accounts. Well, if you have your boot drive already set, so normally in a scenario where you wouldn't see the EFI password blank show up, you won't see it with firewall 2 either. It should go straight to the firewall 2 pre-boot login screen. But in a scenario where the EFI password would show up, like you're trying to boot to recovery HD or something like that, in that case, you will see the EFI password blank show up, and then, as appropriate, the firewall 2 pre-boot login screen.
Perfect. Who's next? Come on. Anybody? Nobody. There we go. Yeah, please.
My information security is pretty strict, work in healthcare. And right now, I don't have password put in yet, but everything is local accounts.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that I'm sorry, I missed the second half of your talk, but you might have talked about it already. But you can only get you can't get the input login and password when you have firewall turned on.
That is correct, yeah. The only option you have is the account icons and then the password blank when you click on that. I did cover that during my talk. I asked about that at WWDC because it's one of the more common questions I get. It's one of the more common questions Apple gets. And the answer right now is it's impossible to get username and password blanks. And that's due to the way that EFI works. I also said in the session that I'm rotten at predicting the future, but as of Lion and Mountain Lion, currently impossible.
Who's next? Up in the back in gray. Yeah.
Just kind of an odd question, but with all the Edward Snowden stuff, and you're all security people, what's your NSA proof precautions that you're taking? Just, I mean, anything out there, because I've heard everything from switching to typewriters to, a bunch of other things that aren't realistic. So just curious.
Sure.
If any of you have thoughts on that, or
So just to repeat it for the video, the concern is around sort of the recent news, the NSA sort of findings, things that have been coming out there, and so what all are some of our folks here doing to maybe mitigate or try and avoid tangling up in those sorts of events?
I think the key component there is that now we don't have to back up anything because they're doing it for us. I mean, all that talk we've done to users, you need to back up your data, you need to back it up, and it's all gone in the wind now.
Rich, please.
With regards to that, I would say that with sufficient time and the resources of a nation state, nothing is truly safe. An example I like to use in that case is, I don't know if anyone's familiar with the history of the Venona project. But what that was is an effort that went on secretly starting mid-World War II and through the 60s when it was discontinued to crack essentially telegrams that were sent by the Soviets back home. And that was using a one-time pad system, which was supposed to be uncrackable, except the Soviets had a little problem of Nazis invading, so their one-time pads occasionally turned into two-time pads, and that was enough of a break in the cryptographic security to allow the U.S. To, with a lot of work and a lot of effort, to crack a significant amount of what should have been completely unbreakable cryptographic traffic. The Soviets basically encrypted and then added another layer of encryption, and the U.S. still broke it. So the moral of that story is, if you have the resources of a nation state like the United States or Russia, or where they are able to devote significant amount of mathematical know-how and everything else, I would say nothing is truly safe. I would say that take your precautions. Keep in mind that probably not much it depends on your environment. I know my environment, nobody's going to be devoting the resources of a nation state to us. But it's one of those things where you do the best you can. But ultimately, if a big enough guy with enough resources comes after it, he'll probably crack it with enough time. That's all I got to say about that.
Please.
a question about the trend towards giving users advertising and change the culture around that. I want to ask analysts that sort of balance.
Sure. So the question was just surrounding admin rights, and this is one of those that tends to come up quite a bit at conferences. Should users be standard users, admin users, and how do we navigate that maybe as the environment changes?
If your users want admin rights, they can get it. They have physical access and unlimited amount of time. They boot it up in a single user mode, change one of your admin accounts or their own, and give them elevated privileges. So I think it's more about understanding what users are trying to do, why they're trying to, do what they need to do to get done and require admin access. Putting the appropriate monitoring in place so you can tell if people are making these changes, if you are really concerned. But most of the people that are going to be adamant about requiring admin access are probably the ones that you can trust with it. So, at least in my opinion.
And to follow up with that, there's a technique I've used before, because I work with medical researchers who want to have a lot of control over their own box. To help, kind of manage this, one thing you can do is you really have got 2 tiers of admin rights. You've got admin rights in the GUI, and you've got admin rights on the command line, which usually goes through sudo. And what you can do is give people admin rights, through like system preferences, so that they're in the admin group, and then just edit the sudoers file so that they don't have sudoers rights, and then lock down root. And at that point, they're an admin user in the GUI, but on the command line, they're a standard user. And sometimes that's a good compromise.
I know we had talked a little bit prior, sometimes what you see very often is folks just want admin rights because there's one thing that they can't do. And I think if there's been a pretty current theme throughout the entire conference, it's been the strength of, for those types of environments, is it really that they need admin rights, or they're frustrated, their users frustrated that they can't get a task done? And so how does self-service play into that? How does a policy play into that? How does just knowing your users play into that? But I think the other side of it, and I know we had talked a little bit about this, the whole, everybody's heard it, right? Great power, great responsibility, and all the rest of it. Users always tend to think of the best case scenario. If I have admin rights, I'll be able to do all of these great and wonderful things. But I know you guys have a little bit of experience with showing them exactly what's possible in the other direction. What is it, I guess, once a year? There's a little bit of tomfoolery that goes on.
I'll give one example. Do you want to, or go ahead about October?
Go ahead.
Okay. So Hacktober is something that goes on every October. Our internal security team, who's very good at what they do, dedicates some time to set up drills and a whole bunch of fun little exercises. One of them is they drop USB sticks on the floor, wait for someone to pick it up, because at that point they've already hacked your system. They go around, find unlocked machines, and then leave fun surprises. Sometimes it's as simple as like a card letting them know, hey, look, I've visited you, that sort of thing. The reverse is true. Also, we open up all of our resources to the company, saying, hey, look, like a perfect example is this month, right now, my security team has taken a hardened Mac, that just the normal Mac I give out, same thing with the PC, locked it up in a physical room, gave everyone the IP addresses of these machines, and the user that's actively logged in, and challenged the entire company to get into these machines. We have some files on these machines, and we're waiting for anyone to see if they can help us, which a lot of other smart individuals within our company, to get into it, to see what we can learn from our users. They've taken that a step further. They haven't had a chance to actually get into there. So now they're choosing to target us through social engineering or some other method to get to our access that will get to the Macs. So it's fun, and it goes both ways. Another example is I'm sure some of you guys know what a Tinsy is, or the rubber duckies. They took public machines, plugged into it, was able to log in and create a reverse SSH shell and have some fun with that. So now we've already come up with some ways to mitigate that, but it's examples like that. I'm sure that's what you meant.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think it comes back to, you start thinking about things like data protection or maybe backup and things like that. And of course, we always test our backup plan, right? We don't just put it in place and then assume it'll work when everything breaks. But, along the same lines is that, okay, well, let's see what you could do if we gave you the opportunity to do it, and then use that information that's already internal.
Yeah, so I didn't really touch on this, but so we're hardening all of our systems, but we're also hardening our users and educating them in such a way that they will find these things. In fact, it's getting harder and harder for our security team to hack our employees because they're aware aware of it now. They're paying attention. They won't just click on a link. One of the ones that was really effective about a year or two ago is they sent out an email saying free T-shirts, and within our environment, that's like gold. So literally, they must have hit a large sample of the company about some, a phishing attempt, which wasn't quite as bad as that, but very similar. And now they can't get that done again. They've already tried, and it just doesn't work anymore. So it's stuff like that.
I think with admin roles too, it comes down to it's the question of why. You were mentioning that, and instead of clicking that checkbox to make them an admin, it becomes a matter of, we didn't self-service a printer, and that's on us, and we should spend the 20 minutes to test that, make sure that works, and then all of a sudden that why goes away. Most of my environments are in the situation that's not a hacker culture, but they're users that really shouldn't have admin privileges. I'm sure we can all feel the same way about that, and it's part of protecting them from themselves. So we look at that every ticket that comes in. It's I need admin privileges, or I need you to do something. It becomes of how can we take that away from us and put that in their hands, a self-service revolution kind of thing.
Do you make exceptions?
We try not to.
Okay.
But we do. Okay.
And I think too, one of the things that comes up a little bit is that's one of those touchy-feely, squishy parts of IT that we all kind of like to shy away from. The actually talking to those end users and not having a conversation that always ends in no, and that's my final answer. But rather, a lot of times I think when we all come to our users and say, well, can you tell me why? A lot of times they hear no. That's what they think that questioning back is. And trying to cultivate that type of environment where you can say to them, well, I'd like to understand more about what it is that we're not providing you. And can you tell me what it is that you're looking for? And I'm going to definitely help you get to wherever you need to be, but I'd also like to make sure I'm not just helping you. Can I help the whole group? Can I help the whole company with this one sort of innocuous ticket? It'd be great to be able to help the whole company. So it's another opportunity there. Please.
More specific question I haven't seen a lot with or Casper is we now have a upcoming requirement to try and do encrypted connections in the data center. And what, if anything, are any of you doing for encrypting your MySQL connections to the data center?
Do you want to repeat the question?
Sure. I'll repeat the question. So the concern is for a high amount of security within the data center, and to ensure that the MySQL connections are also encrypted. And what might any of us be doing in that sense?
I think your question as a whole suggests that there might be a problem with your data center. If someone's already in your data center, that's suggesting a bigger issue.
Somebody's in every data center.
Sure, but intrusion detection is probably the best way to understand what's happening in your environment and start asking yourself if you'll get better or more impact from looking at the entry points and understanding who's getting in and being able to react quickly, or locking it down so much that it might be unusable.
And also, is this your data center, or is this like a colo location where you're contracting out to a third party?
It's ours.
Okay. Then yeah, you should know what's going on in your data center.
Yeah.
No offense or anything.
Please.
So our company is rather strict with social media and accessing things like Facebook.
Okay.
With OS 10, it's kind of integrating Facebook and Twitter and all that stuff in the OS. How can we pull that out? We want them, we're okay with them going through the browser and seeing our nice little warning page that says they're not be charging a time for this. Traffic Facebook, if I find them. We just don't want it going through the OS.
Sure. So the question is just with the concern of a greater amount of integration for Facebook and other social services, just directly within, say, Notification Center, within the OS itself, there's just a concern that maybe there's not that opportunity to throw down the warning in front of users. Rich, I know you had mentioned some of what you all do.
Yeah, this isn't at my current job, which is very, they've got security issues, but Facebook isn't one of them. I used to work for an unnamed government agency as a government contractor. I know that makes me sound like I work for the CIA, but it wasn't the CIA. I'll deny everything. At any rate, but they were very much stop Facebook, stop Twitter, stop all this. But there were still some folks in like public affairs that needed access to social media. And I just remember that we got this, okay, people can access social media if they're specifically authorized, and we're going to lock it down by the MAC address. And by the way, there's this whole long list of security requirements that you have to comply with to get to Facebook. And of course, all the requirements were written for Windows. You have to have this, you have to have that, you have to lock down this. And I'm looking at it, I'm going, why don't I just run this in Windows? So what I did was we started out by spinning up parallels. I think later we went to VMware Fusion. We actually set it so that the MAC address in question was a virtual MAC address, where we had it set to bridge networking. And that way we could apply all those protections and security requirements to that VM. And that really got out of the user's way of their everyday work. Because in that case, they would just launch the VM, log in, launch IE or launch Firefox, whatever their preferred browser was, go and do what they needed to do at Facebook or at Twitter or at whatever. Then once they were done, they closed out of the VM, they went back to their regular their regular environment where they didn't have access to Facebook. But it meant that that additional security load, which I didn't think I'd be able to translate anyway, they didn't have to worry about as part of their everyday work. And so basically it was just, got locked down by MAC address. In that case, you wouldn't have access to that additional Facebook built-in functionality in OS 10. That was a way of managing it, at least for our users that needed access to Facebook without layering on even more security requirements than were otherwise needed.
So I have a different approach to look at the problem. I kind of look at it from a different layer. I'm looking at it as a trust issue. If you can't trust your users to go out and manage their time, I think that's a whole different thing. Like, I see it as like you should give your users whatever access they need, and their performance should tell whether they're screwing around on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever. And if they are, then you shouldn't need the employee anyway. But you shouldn't restrict all your employees to that type of requirement. And if you were to pull it out of the OS or whatever, I'm sure you're going to have I haven't personally done it myself, but if you were, I'm sure if Apple were to update it, you'd run into these issues where you'd have to constantly fix it and fix it over and over and over, and it's just not worth the time and effort. Yeah.
And it does feel a lot like, certainly when you come at it maybe from certain agencies where there's a stringent requirement, then maybe that's the road that you go down and that's a type of overhead that you take on. But I think I always remember hearing that, you're trying to solve an HR problem with a technology solution. And so is that an opportunity for an acceptable use thing? Is that an opportunity for folks they sign off when they come in? But then, if it weren't necessarily an HR problem, but more of an institutional requirement, then you're probably looking at things like fiddling around with MCX and for as long as that's available as a tool and things along those lines.
Yeah. So just one more quick one. If that was ultimately what you absolutely had to do. You guys own the edge and DNS, so you can drop it through a DNS like sinkhole or there's plenty of network things that you could do to stop traffic from going to those sites.
I think on top of that, like blocking it is one thing, letting it open is one thing, but that in between, that's always where you have difficulty. You want to have a pretty splash page that says you don't want to use this or you shouldn't be doing something. I think that's making those hard decisions, and many times at an HR level or at a management level, to just say, it's a work computer, they have phones, this is a less and less of an issue every day. We're just not going to allow Facebook, or the opposite, or LinkedIn, or whatever it may be. Making the distinction instead of trying to incrementally do one thing or the other.
Yeah, when you've got a policy, but everyone's a special exception to the policy, everything becomes a one-off. Sure.
Yeah. And then to reiterate what he said, if it's, and maybe what you said, if it's not Facebook or Twitter, they have a cell phone with a bazillion different apps now. Are you going to block each one?
Yeah, that was always my favorite thing about that particular social media policy was that if you didn't have to be, you had your iPhone, it was talking to AT&T or Verizon's network, you just pick that up and start using Facebook on that. But it wasn't on the government network. That was the important thing.
So I've actually got one from the forum there. Some folks are using 802.1x cert authentication in their environment, and they deliver certificate and system-level 802.1x profiles using a config profile. The method of installing the cert doesn't, however, prevent the exporting of the private key when running 10.7 or 10.8. Has anyone found a way to protect the private key when using a config profile on 10.7 and 10.8?
Not with using the profile.
This is something that we tried to look at, and we weren't able to effectively do it through configuration profiles. It's something that we've talked to Apple about, and they said that they're looking into it. But
And Jason?
As far as I know, it's been resolved in 10.9.
Oh, nice.
The export option
Sweet.
doesn't
Cool.
work. It'll export the certificate, but when you try to reuse it on another machine, or actually no, it won't even export it. It'll come up, try to give you a password dialog box, and then fail.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome to hear.
And I know prior, my organization, we were doing it with a third-party CA tool. It was Java-based and all that. And really in the background, they were just twiddling around with the security command and using, what is it, no export as the flag or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, -X.
yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully that helps. Yeah, go ahead.
While we're on the topic of Java, our central enterprise system runs on a very old Java. Windows clients tend not to have much of an issue with running older versions of Java, but the Mac clients do. So we're really trying to dive in and find a solution that kind of fits, in that need. You still have to have that version of Java. Yes, we know it's insecure. Yes, we know it's unsupported. But I just want to leave it up to you guys to see, how do you guys approach this type of situation?
So the question is, again, just around Java and how do we work around, if need be, keeping old versions available or upgrading to newer versions as required? Please.
So we were actually in the same predicament, and we found a tool called NSS Security. It's by Google, and what it is it's a plugin that you put in to the browser, and then it takes a file called etc NSS Security, and in that file you can define the whitelists that you want to allow. Like you can allow, like only Java sites from your company's domain, and you can blacklist all the others. The other advantage of this tool is that you can say, okay, if you're on this domain or this site, use this Java version. If you're on this domain, you can use this version, and you can just kind of cascade those. So if you have like very old Java versions, like in your case, you can do that. So I would definitely check out the NSS Security Tool.
And another good thing that while he was doing this, we moved the default location for the Java plugin. So if a user tries to use it on other methods, it won't work.
It's called NSS Security, but it's a Java, or not Java, a Google plugin.
And we'll be sure to post that
Yeah.
as well in the resources. Please.
When it comes down to automated patching of Java up to different versions, if you have users that have a legitimate exemption for patching, how have you been handling exemptions in policy process?
So again, the question is how, if you do have a user who's got a legitimate need to have an exemption for updating to, say, the latest version of Java, how is that being handled? Rich?
For me, for those exceptions, I actually have a extension attribute, like a manual extension attribute that I just set for them. And that way they get automatically excluded from these. I have an extension attribute that checks for what version of Java you're currently running. And in the event that you're not running the current version, I've got a policy set to bring you up to date. But you can also set a manual extension attribute to just say, don't update. And that's one way to handle it. Just have that as one of the criteria in your smart group.
Yep, that's pretty much what I was doing too.
Nice.
Works really well.
You have to share this one. You guys?
I'm good.
Okay. These two are mine. Cool. So, anybody else? Have we got some more out there? I apologize for the light. Sometimes hard to see. Please.
So if you're giving extensions for Java, does that mean you got to turn off XProtect as well then?
If only we had someone up here who knew about XProtect. So the question is, if we're avoiding maybe forced upgrades to different versions of Java, how are we handling XProtect?
In my case, I have a script that manages the XProtect plist specifically for Java. What it does is it'll read the CF bundle, information, and whatever the current information is for the current Java plugin, it will insert that as the minimum allowed version into the XProtect plist. And that's something that I have currently set as a script on my Casper server to run like every hour. And so far that's worked pretty well. It gives me a breathing space between the time that new Java updates come out and Apple, who has been better about this recently, will put out an update to XProtect to say, block it.
Does that mean you're cached then? That you have to cache that so it drops line?
Yeah, I have it set to run offline, yeah. And it works pretty well. That's up on my GitHub. I can put the link for that up on the resources page after the session. But I mean, that solves my problem with regards to XProtect because it's managing just the one thing I care about, but the rest of the XProtect protection I'm still having, so I don't need to disable it.
Can I try to summarize? So your method is essentially trying to modify it to expand it to the range you want effectively. Is that?
No, I'm basically whatever the current version of the Java browser plugin is installed, that is, my script will read that and feed that back into the XProtect meta.plist, insert it as the minimum allowed version. So say you're running, if you have a requirement that you have to run Java 7 update 25 for whatever reason, install Java 7 update 25, run my script, and it will update XProtect.meta.plist, so now that Java 7 update 25 is the minimum allowed version.
Yeah, essentially treats it as a railing to keep folks from falling off into the next. Go ahead, please.
Hypothetically, there's a version OS 10 server coming out that hypothetically would fix that for you. It hypothetically would on the server. Hypothetically.
Perfect.
Awesome.
I won't comment on that on video. Hypothetically. Yeah. Anyone? Yeah, up in the back, please.
Yeah, actually I do have one. As far as offsite storage like iCloud and Dropbox, how do you guys handle a situation where you don't want your data necessarily getting out of those locations?
Sure. So the question is, how are we handling maybe preventing data making it out or managing the data that's able to get out to offsite storage, third-party storage?
End user notification or education in this case.
Sure. And then that the user education side of that, and maybe as well as the technology side.
I have a little bit on that. We, two of our main clients are very intellectual property based, and neither of them have a strict policy against Dropbox or Google Drive or any specific thing. So we've used some smart lists to just kind of see how many machines have Dropbox installed. I've also just considered, a little bit inspired by just what you said, maybe that is auto-generating tickets based off somebody installed Dropbox. Okay, let's prompt that with a ticket, and then let's look at why did they install Dropbox. It always comes back to that with us, is we're always trying to define the why. And sometimes we're able to make a management change, but most of the time we're charged with protecting the company, but they don't want to be protected. So.
And as far as Dropbox goes, you can also set that up as a restricted app in the JSS, so that the first time it launches, you can either have it display a message saying or quit it and delete it. And at least Dropbox has a better name than Tor does, because Tor is in a lot of names, like directory utility. But at least Dropbox, that's a process that you should be able to filter for pretty easily. iCloud's different because that's built into the OS. I don't have a good answer for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it used to be a little more straightforward when you could go and manage the system preference pane, but now if you were to go to any number of sites and the first time you log in, the browser's sort of savvy and now offers to insert those credentials for you into those various services, and yeah, so it does make it a little bit more of a sticky situation.
And it might also come down to trust. Once again, trusting your users to be responsible, frankly.
Yeah, that's essentially how we approach the problem. we've made it very clear that if anyone leaks anything, that they'll be gone, and that more than likely, without a doubt, we will find them. We've had people that leaked things, and we will find them, and then they will be fired. We do our best to communicate best practice throughout the company. We have talks and like things about like how to approach problems, and we're very open about the whole thing. It's a very kind of like be smart, don't leak approach just to everything. We trust them, right? They don't need iCloud or Dropbox to leak something, right? They could do it through some other means.
Yeah. Printed paper.
Yeah, printed paper. Yeah. So I think the education piece is really a good way to go. I heard something that Marco was doing that I thought was pretty cool. He was telling me about some of the stuff that he's done. You should approach him when you get a chance.
Up in the back?
Firewall 2 and admin users.
Okay.
I do lots of reporting, find out who's encrypting the drives, use FE setups, automatically re-encrypt them. So I can report, I can mitigate. Do you guys know any ways to prevent unencryption by admin users?
Not by admin users. Yeah, my best advice for that is going to be reported monitoring. It's going to be one of those things where find out why they're decrypting the machine, because in that case, this may be a person problem, or at least something you can talk about with the person. And if it's like, well, my machine's too slow if it's encrypted. Well, maybe the answer there is let's get you an SSD, or find out why. Because Firewall 2 should have a very low impact, and it's really designed so that in my opinion, it inconveniences probably the least of the encryption solutions I've worked with. So I think the answer first there is find out why they're doing it, and
We are all SSDs.
yeah.
And yeah, in our testing, it basically makes no performance difference once you get past boot time.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing too is, just with the industry that I was in prior to joining Jamf, it was made very clear that if one of us was responsible for the company making front page news, that would not just be a bad day for us, that it would be a bad year, and that we would be fully and wholly responsible for any actions we might have taken that led to us being in the news. And so it wasn't even with a bunch of fear-mongering and saber-rattling. It was just stated very matter-of-factly, this is why we do it. If you choose to go outside, color outside the lines, that's a choice you made, but you'll have to be responsible for the consequences of that choice, which it sounds like may or may not fall on deaf ears, but it was certainly made very clear to us, let's put it that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and that may be part of it. I mean, it sounds like it's a cultural issue, which means it's a people issue. And the people issues get handled by HR.
Yeah, well, our culture is fairly aggressive with people that choose to remove friction, right? Like what we were saying. But even in ours, we had backing from our security team and executive staff, and we made it very clear that this is important to not just IT, but to the company. And we made a really good push with the help from other parts of the organization. And we had the conversations with the users, but if that wasn't going well, we actually talked to people's managers with them and made it clear that like this is important. And then at some point, we got backing from the rest of the company that we weren't going to stand for it anymore. And if we found a machine that was unencrypted, we would cripple it. It would no longer be able to boot. So one way.
So along the lines of file vault, we've actually got another one that came in off of the discussion board there. We have a peculiar instance where users don't have a recovery partition, a direct result of a poorly deployed OS disk image without a recovery partition. We've resolved this issue for new deployments using Casper. How can we deploy File Vault 2 for those users without a recovery partition? So truly, it sounds like maybe the real question is, if I don't have a recovery partition, do I have another option other than start from scratch?
Yeah, I mean, there are tools for creating a recovery partition installer. What is Perry's last name? Oh, I'm blanking. But there is a gentleman on GitHub. His name is Mager Valp, M-A-G-E-R-V-A-L-P. He has created a platypus powered tool for essentially where you can drop the OS 10 installer, whatever the latest version is that you got from the Mac App Store. You can drop it on there. It will then create from that an installer package that will uninstall an existing recovery partition if it's not there and put down a fresh one. So that might be one way of handling that problem. And you don't even need to restart. It just handles it on the fly. That's the kind of thing you can just push out. The user won't see anything. And in the end, you'll have a recovery partition again.
Yeah, we did something similar. It seemed to only affect 10.7. We found something on open source somewhere. I would love to remember. I'll try to find the link. But yeah, as soon as we installed 10.7, we actually did the check to verify that it was there. And if it wasn't, we installed it. And then we knew that we're going this encryption route, so then we prompted them to encrypt. So it was really fluid. And it worked like 99.9% of the time. I think we only had like 2 instances where I wasn't able to create it after running the tool.
Carbon copy cloner build that too.
Great.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
the
it'll
comment
preserve
was
that
that
as
Carbon
well.
Copy Cloner is also capable of building that as well. Just one sec, let me grab up top there.
Slightly obscure, but if you have a file vault key in the recovery partition, and the recovery partition gets storage, is there a way to replace the recovery partition with the key without reinstalling?
Sorry, I'm not following, because the recovery key shouldn't be stored in your
Yeah.
recovery partition.
Not the recovery key, sorry, the password loop. So the pre-boot environment is gone. You
Right.
want to replace it with the new one, but that pre-boot one originally was connected to the drive there.
I mean, it's not necessarily connected to the recovery partition, but in that case, what I would really recommend is, I haven't tried replacing the recovery partition on an encrypted machine. Usually in that case, I would be better safe than sorry, and I would decrypt the machine, put the recovery partition back, then re-encrypt. I haven't tried to do that kind of live on the fly. I have a broken, because normally when you have a broken recovery partition, you can't boot into the machine because you don't have access to that unencrypted space with the unlock tools. So at that point, you're kind of stuck anyway. So you might as well, get it to a point by booting off of like internet recovery, I should say, where you'll have access to those unlock keys, those unlock tools like you would from your recovery partition.
And that actually brings up another point. I don't know that it's talked about all that much, but there is the standalone, like you can create on a flash drive, a portable recovery partition, which, I'm not saying it's like the absolute pinnacle of helpful tools, but it certainly is helpful in a pinch for very specific situations.
Most definitely.
Yeah, and we'll go ahead, we'll make sure we put the links up to the, recovery partition injector.
Yeah, and also as long as as long as your shop isn't blocking internet recovery, if you're in that kind of situation where you need a recovery partition, or where you need the recovery HD tools and you don't have access to them otherwise, boot to internet recovery. It is just like your recovery partition, right down to the unlock tools.
And on a fairly decent connection, I think the concern is always, gee, if I use internet recovery, it's going to take forever and ever. It really,
no, it's quick.
Fairly good connection. It's only, 650 megs. So
yeah,
you're looking at 3-4 minutes on a fairly speedy connection.
Yeah.
I've made you wait far too long, please.
The recovery partition, does it matter that, it's partition 1 or partition 2? By default, it's the primary partition, and then your Macintosh HD would be your secondary partition. If you're adding it after the fact, does it no matter what place it's on the disk?
So the question is just, is there a relevance to what particular slice of disk the recovery partition is?
I'm not sure the answer to that one. I think it does need to be associated with at least that boot partition, because it's usually the way it is, it's like carved off from that recovery partition. I can't say that for certain. I haven't tested that scenario.
I think it does, because I had 10.9 beta partition and then my regular partition, and it had multiple.
Yeah, you'll wind up with multiple recovery HDs.
When I went to run firewall 2 on my 10.8 bar, I don't have
A valid. Yeah.
Gotcha.
So the comment was, with multiple recovery partitions in place, there's the potential for a little bit of a mix-up there, and maybe the OS not being able to recognize the appropriate one in the appropriate place. So it does seem to indicate that there is a relevance there.
I guess kind of in the vein of follow-on to, but also anybody that's splitting user data from system data, like Oscar, is there any obviously, if like they are carving out partitions, like what are they?
Right.
So the question is just about carving out additional partitions for user data, and how would that play? Would it play nice with the recovery partition?
That can be tricky because usually how OS X wants to set up the key to, basically the way it usually works when you save like a decryption password, or not a decryption, but basically the password to unlock, is that it will try to stick it in like your login keychain. But now that login keychain is on another partition which is encrypted, so now you have a chicken and egg problem. So you can boot to it, but you can't access your stuff. I've seen some people work around that by putting the unlock key in like the system keychain, but in general, it's the kind of thing that Apple really didn't design it to work that way. So you will run into some strange issues occasionally, and if you call Apple, they'll be like, oh, that's not supported.
So, I'm just going to repeat something that Marco told me yesterday, that he's tested it, but hasn't like deployed it. As far as encryption, if you have a secondary keychain for the other partition, that it should pass through.
Yeah, as long as the keychain can, basically as long as the unlock can pass through before the OS wants your user partition to mount, as long as that unlock happens in time, then there should be no problem, but it's not how Apple designed Firewall 2 to work. Apple's design model was a laptop where you had one hard drive and your users folder lived on that hard drive.
Yeah, please.
So I have a very large Windows deployment, and we have tools that allow, if you're on network, you can bypass encryption login. There's, FD setup all restart that allow you to do that interactively. Are you aware of any way to do that with the Casper Suite, to do that as a policy?
To do that as a policy, no, because right now there is no built-in functionality that I'm aware of in the Casper Suite at this time. I am rotten at predicting the future. Talk to your account manager. Yeah. That would be the kind of thing that you'd probably have to script yourself.
Well, I mean, isn't the file vault off pre-boot? Like, you don't have access to the... It has
Well,
to be in the
with
EFI?
FD setup auth restart, what it'll do is when you run it, it'll restart the box and it will stick an unlock key in system memory, which will then get cleared out by the reboot process. So it'll actually, for that one reboot, it will take you, you'll bypass the pre-boot login screen, it'll just take you to the regular login screen. And Apple built that in starting in 10.8.2. And it's a nice functionality, especially for people who run like a headless Mac Mini at a colo somewhere and they want to patch the box.
Yeah, it's also really good, like if you're doing remote assistance for a user, or even you're at the desk for that user, and you say, oh, this should only take about 45 minutes, whatever it is that you have to do. And so they go, great, I'm going to go to lunch, I'll be right back. And they come back in 45 minutes, and you've been dead in the water for the last 35 of 45 because you had to restart once.
Yep.
And if potentially your Casper admin account isn't enabled or something along those lines, if you don't have some other account that is FileVault enabled, it can be a little embarrassing.
Yeah.
A lot embarrassing, actually.
And that was one thing I wanted to call out at my FileVault 2 session. For those who weren't there, all remote management tools that I know of require the operating system to be running. The operating system is not running at the pre-boot login screen. There's no way to run those tools.
I have a feature request for that. Casper, maybe an option to do all restart.
Yep. Is it up in Jamf Nation or? Okay.
Imagine how much visibility that feature request would get if you all voted it up right now.
Yeah.
Do it. Please.
Have any of you been required to restrict the use of external storage?
So the question is, have any of the folks up here been required to restrict the use of external storage?
We have some public machines that I've locked down USB devices for. And I used, was it MCX?
Yeah, it's managed preferences.
Yeah, to do it. And because it was just a mini that literally has nothing on it, I validated that it was pushed with another script that I used.
And I was in that boat as well. And the lack of granularity, especially when you've got folks from maybe the other side of the fence staring at you going, well, we can whitelist an entire group of USB keys because we purchased them from an approved vendor. You can do that too, right? No. There are a number of vendors out there with sort of odd domain names who purport to be able to do things like that, approved, and I don't know if they're just looking at, like, say, the USB ID for the piece of gear and establishing a list based on that. But yeah, that wasn't a fun conversation to have. Who else? Yeah, please.
Are all of you guys bound to AD? And
I am.
because we actually use Novell still as our central authority for everything, unfortunately. So I was talking to some of the other guys that have Novell, and what is the best way to set up network accounts? We have a parallel AD, but it's not our central identity management. So, I mean, is it to write a login hook, a separate script for that? I mean, I'm not sure how to approach the issue of using eDirectory as, for all the user accounts.
So you want to create like mobile accounts or what?
Well, so on the Windows machines, the Novell client is baked into the login process. I could create everybody only in AD. I could use AD.
Okay.
But there's a complicated LDAP sync that we do, and that doesn't always work right. And so I was trying to see if there's a way to natively use eDirectory to let them log in. Because right now, I don't have that on Macs, but they're all local accounts. I don't have any network accounts.
And it looks like maybe
Just
I don't know about recently, but historically at least, there were instructions available for how to connect to a directory. I never did them. I don't have any information about how well they worked, but at least at one time, but they're still there, so you can do it. If you can catch Eric Dreyer around here someplace, he wrote that stuff, and he's quite knowledgeable about that. But if you can find one of the older directory services, Apple training series books, that describe that process, that would be a good starting. And there's also a third-party product. But
Yeah, there's a third-party product. Yeah, that's what I used before.
And another option might be, depending on, is eDirectory speaking LDAP? Is it like, because if it conforms, I want to say it's RFC 2307. Is that the kind of generic LDAP that Apple has as an option in addition to Open Directory, I think? But we have, in our shop, we're not using Novell, but we have an open LDAP server with no support for OS X specifically, that I was able to use the RFC 2037, 2307, I'm getting it mixed up. Basically the generic LDAP to set up our accounts that way. And for creating the account, I set it up as a non-syncing mobile account using the Create Mobile Account tool. So that might be one way to go about that. One gotcha that I have seen with non-Apple LDAP systems has been with FileVault 2. You'll want to make sure that you have an attribute set up in your LDAP for Apple-generated UID, and you'll want to make sure that that generated UID is all uppercase, because otherwise you may see some funky FileVault 2 problems. If the generated UID isn't there, you won't be able to, you can enable FileVault 2, but the account won't appear at the pre-boot login screen. And if the generated UID isn't all uppercase, you'll see some funky issues with password syncing, where you can update the password in the OS, but it'll never flow back down to FileVault 2. And if you look at my blog, I actually have a blog entry on this because I was working with someone on it, and the post I have on it says what we found, but that's basically it. You need to have the right UID, generated UID information up in your LDAP, and you need to make sure it's all uppercase.
So we've got a couple coming in from the board again. Have you encountered situations where Mac antivirus did something for you? And I feel like maybe I should have read that in a more cynical tone. Or did something for you? I think you guys are doing some pretty interesting stuff on AV.
Yeah, does anyone else got anything on them?
Catches Windows viruses like crazy.
Yeah. So no. In fact, Mac AV hasn't really done anything for us through any of the things that we purchased, except for open up a 0-day. So we removed it, and we built our own. The one that we do, it looks at a lot of the files that someone that was going for a persistent connection to the machine would attack, and we monitor those files, and then store it, get the file size, the permissions, and we create a hash. We throw it up to an endpoint that hits a DB, and then very quickly now we can see across the board the outliers. So which machines have extra pliths or launch demons or what have you. Our CERT team, our security team, spent a long time looking at the most common areas and other ways that people are normally finding entry points for. And they're just looking at all of them all the time and looking for any deltas. That was, what we did. Not everyone will be able to build something like that, but it actually is a quick, essentially bash script. So,
I'm a little curious too, just on the touchy-feely stuff. I know that one of the things that I had to deal with very often was that things would make headlines in the news, and then I would be asked, "Are we safe?" And it would be for machines or versions of the OS that none of us run, or but that very oftentimes it seemed as though because of the heightened media coverage, there was far more concern than you would see maybe necessarily on the other side of the fence. And I was just curious if you guys have all had to deal with that one time or another.
Yeah, we had to deal with that. Usually, you could debunk most of it. I mean, we locked down the machines to a point. We kept everything up to date. We had our dashboard reporting that was visible by our security team, so they knew we were fully patched. And as long as we could provide those facts and data, they were good with what we had.
Yeah, I found the same thing as well. I mean, as soon as it was possible to have extension attributes that were showing Java versions, plugin versions, thanks to Rich on quite a few of those, that definitely became a frequent part of the reporting. And I think, not to be sales pitchy, but, so now you know what's coming. It is one of the few places where I actually ever used the limited accounts for folks who weren't help desk or admins or IT folks, was that we would have our IS&T and give them access via their directory credentials to very limited reporting within the JSS that would vet that stuff out, because otherwise it became this sort of administrative overhead of once a week, and if you didn't send it, now you're on the hook for it. And so rather than bothering with all that sort of craziness of essentially becoming a glorified mail delivery person, it really was a thing that helped us keep folks in the know. If they wanted to know right now what the current patch level was, they just logged in and they looked at the reports, patched, unpatched, old flash, new flash, whatever it might be.
For us, we have a pretty good internal community. Obviously, we use Facebook a lot, and we use Facebook groups. One of them is Facebook Security something. I don't remember the exact name. And people will post things. Oh, look, I found this on the internet. And very typically, we'll go to post our security team, but another user will beat us to it and be like, this isn't going to affect us because X, Y, or they bring really valid concerns that maybe we haven't thought of or whatever. But usually our security team is pretty on it and proactive. Like, yes, we just heard about this and we are safe, and or we're patching it today, or
Yeah. So I've got two more just from the site real quick here, and I don't want to hold folks, so certainly if you have a pressing place to be, don't let us hold you here, but any recommendations for two-factor VPN for Macs?
We use Juniper.
Juniper?
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay.
we have Juniper as well. That is dependent, unless you're using Junos Pulse, that is dependent on Java in your browser. But we're using two-factor because we've got Juniper with the RSA tokens, and that's been working pretty well for us.
Yeah.
So we're actually using Juniper as well, but we're using something called Duo token. So it's like this little thing you slide into a USB port and you touch it and it just generates a random key. and we use that for our two-factor. So it works like
It's called Duo Token.
Yeah, Duo Token. Yeah.
Yeah, we experimented with some of that too. We had, I can't remember the name of the brand anymore, but it was a token. And we usually would use it for iPhone users. They would get a token on their phone.
And then the last one that's in the forum right now anyway is when people think of, most people think of iOS when they speak of BYOD, otherwise known as bring your own disaster, according to this particular user. What are your best practices to share BYOD for OS 10 devices? I don't know if you guys have had a lot of experience with that.
You guys.
I mean, we see that happen a lot with like some iOS devices, but I haven't actually seen it with OS 10 devices.
Yeah.
You wouldn't be very effective if you brought your own machine. You'd basically be able to do nothing.
Yeah, I mean, in general, for BYOD, your responsibilities, in my opinion, your responsibilities are to protect your company's data and to make sure as little data of your company's data is resident on that machine as possible. So in general, that kind of thing, I would leverage virtual desktops. Make sure as much of your company's services are available via website, via the internet, so they don't even need to go into your company's network. That's your responsibility. Your responsibility is not to protect that machine. Your responsibility is to make sure whatever's on that machine doesn't cause problems for you.
And
So
I can definitely second that. We were just dipping a toe in that, and every single time it was, great, so let's get you a hosted virtual desktop. And you certainly had to have alphabet soup after your name for them to even consider it SVP, EVP.
yeah.
It was always of a certain clout that was able to make the request in the first place. And then more often than not, because of that separation, you found that the user satisfaction wasn't as high as perhaps they anticipated. They thought, hey, I'm going to bring in my OS 10 machine, and you're not going to do anything to it, but I'm still going to get all the good stuff.
Right.
Right.
Well, no, not necessarily. We can give you all the good stuff, but we have to do a lot of things to your machine that you might not enjoy. Or we can put all the good stuff in a box, but now you have to jump in that box every time. And so it sort of petered out at that point. Yeah.
We've had a recent conversation with a client of the difference. Again, they're very concerned about intellectual property, about data leakage, and now they have these external consultants, us being one of them. And we can at least via Casper provide some knowledge of, look, all our machines are encrypted. We're actually following some practices, but some of these are just one person in a random office somewhere in the world. And so originally the concept that they had was only employees, had company-owned machine and had server access and email addresses. But we've actually started to move in a model to where there's something in between a consultant and an employee, and they get a company machine, and they're maybe not an employee, they're a different group, an OU and AD, but they're in every other respect an employee.
Yeah.
And that's been an interesting thing for them, a different thought process on their management side, and different for us too, as providing them stuff. So it's kind of an interesting side.
And to go along with the BYOD, one thing that my workplace did that I thought was both very nice and saved us a lot of work, we made a bright line about we don't work on personal machines, period. We will make, if it's something that you install like the VPN client and the VPN client is not working, we will make a best effort to help you out. But if it comes down to, we're talking back and forth with Juniper, and Juniper's like, oh yeah, this sucker's broken to the point where you're just going to need to reinstall the OS. That was the point where we handed the laptop back to the user and said, look, this sucker is broken enough because you also installed the AnyConnect VPN client, and you also installed the old Cisco VPN client, and you installed this other VPN client I've never even heard of. This is really busted now. Go fix it yourself. That's your personal machine. We don't touch it.
Yeah, we took that same stance as well. We also tried to understand why they wanted to do a BYOD and tried to work around what they were asking that we weren't delivering on the corporate side. And that got us a lot of traction with the end users so that they would agree to be managed and agree to take a corporate asset. And as far as he was mentioning about contractors having company assets, what we ended up doing was our contractors were in separate OUs, and most of their access was controlled by GPO. So that limited their ability to do any damage to the company.
So we've gone over, it looks like here, just by a handful of minutes. I would imagine everyone's probably maybe itching to be someplace other than the beautiful Guthrie Theater. But obviously, if there are any other questions, we'll make every effort that we can to participate in those discussion posts. We've got a couple of follow-ups, I suppose, where we'll post some of the resources there. In the meantime, everybody, thanks very much for coming in. We really appreciate it. And thank you, of course, to these guys as well. Yeah.